Hello, everybody. Here is another talk, Lyceum talk during the pandemic, which we will be discussing on Tuesday, the 16th of July. It's called Nothing Like Childbirth. It's nothing like childbirth. Joyce Carol Oates has done it more than 20 times. So too did Iris Murdoch. Patrick White notched up around a dozen. Jane Austen 7, Virginia Woolf 8, Henry James around 20. Childless, the lot of them. I am, of course, speaking about novels. I've published 8 novels. With each one, I've been asked by otherwise sensible people if it's like a birth, or perhaps the grown child leaving home. The answer is a simple, obdurate no. No messy communion with another in order to get the project started. No incessant consultation with another as the project progresses. No constant negotiation with the object itself for the next 20 or 30 or 40 years. This is how it is. There are the delights of lolling around in your imagination during the 2 or 3 or 4 years of writing and rewriting. There's the pleasures of solitude, of working in isolation, just you and the emerging novel, and through your reading, you're joined by the best minds that have ever put pen to paper. There are the regular frustrations and irritations and challenges that serve to remind you that being human is all about the necessity and the discomforts of change and uncertainty. There's the knowledge that eventually you'll hone this mess of ideas and characters into a form that makes sense to other people, a form that's sufficiently elegant to meet your own hard-to-satisfy demands. Writers can be sloppy in every aspect of human existence except writing. As Cynthia Ozick wrote in her essay, The Seam of the Snail, which in fact I have read out before to certain Lyceum members. Listen to this. She writes, I attend to crabbed minutiae and am self-trammelled through taking pains. I am a kind of human snail, locked in and condemned by my own nature. The ancients believed that the moist track left by the snail as it crept was the snail's own essence, depleting its body little by little. The farther the snail toiled, the smaller it became, until it finally rubbed itself out. That is how we perfectionists are. Say to us, excellence, and we'll show you how we use up our substance and wear ourselves away while making scarcely any progress at all. The fact that I'm a perfectionist in a narrow strait only and nowhere else is hardly to the point, since nothing matters to me so much as a comely and muscular sentence. It is my narrow strait, this snail's road, the track of the sentence I am writing now, and when I have eked out the wet substance, ink or blood that is its mark, I will begin the next sentence. Only in treading out sentences am I a perfectionist, but then there's nothing else I know how to do or take much interest in. That was the novelist and essayist Cynthia Ozick. This is not the sort of approach recommended in the raising of a child. You write, you read, you revise, you read and write some more, you shape and reshape, you lop off the juts and bumps, you sand the rough surfaces, you send it to your agent, who sends it to your publisher. There's the last refinements, and then it goes into production. There are proofs and more proofs and cover roughs. Then the novel is with the printer, and there's nothing more you can do. And then a delivery man arrives, nearly always a man, with a box from Scribe, and it certainly was a man with this particular box. My delighted surprise must have been writ unambiguously across my face. I'd not expected this parcel for another week. The young man asks about the contents of the box. Advance copies of my new novel, Invented Lives, I say. Now he's looking pretty excited too. Are you a reader, I ask? And it turns out he is. So I invite him to share my joy. Picture it. The two of us on my narrow porch, opening the box, bearing through the padding, and then the book in my hand. The two of us poring over that very first copy. He agrees it looks splendid. He loves the gold mosaic. Yeah, he says, I'd want to read that. Good title, too. We flip through to make sure the pages aren't blank, one of the writer's nightmares. All is well. When the young man turns to leave, he addresses me by name. Goodbye, Andrea, he says, and congratulations. It's a lovely and unexpected connection. I carry the box inside. My dog, a literary canine in the tradition of Flush, recognises the significance of the occasion. In the living room, I withdraw each book one by one. No matter how many times this happens, the arrival of first copies, the magic never diminishes, nor the excitement, nor the pleasure. The thing fully formed, bearing the authority of print, the public cladding of a cover, your own name written on the front. Not that that strikes you, or at least not me. The book is a thing in itself, not simply mine anymore. In fact, not mine at all, in one sense. My household was for many years a two-writer household. We always felt we got double for our trouble, double the pleasure. The same ritual was observed every time advance copies arrived. I now prop the books side by side, covers facing out on the shelf above the TV, and I study them. I see how the light plays on the mosaic, how the title, Invented Lives, seems to emerge from the mosaic. It's gorgeous. The cover was created by Laura Thomas at Scribe. I can therefore admire it wholeheartedly. Excuse me. I take down a copy and flip through it. I can't read the text, not yet. If I find mistakes, if I find sentences that fall over, there's nothing I can do about it now. Later, I'll read the book. Later, I'll mark it for readings. For the moment, I'll just enjoy the object. It's nothing like Childbirth. My work is done. The book is separate from me. It's now up to reviewers and readers to decide its fate. Nothing like Childbirth at all. So, starting all over again. With the publication of Invented Lives came that battery of not unfamiliar questions. Most particularly, will I ever write another novel? I felt emptied out, not a spark of an idea, not a spark. So terrified was I of the void, I found myself in a panicky riffling through the piles of unread books which had mounted up in the previous 4 years. I needed to fill up. I needed to know there'd be another novel. There began a frantic reading, a filling up. At this stage, there seems to be little rhyme nor reason in the choice of books. Novels old and new, history, social philosophy and political books that deal with these perilous days, lots of them, including favourite authors like Zygmunt Bauman and Timothy Snyder. Biographies, but in the back of my mind, I actually know what the next book will be. I know it's shaped around death. That's very vague, but I know that much. A line that may be the first line of the new novel has been with me for some time. They call me Dr. Death. But I keep this almost out of reach keep this knowledge almost out of reach, knowing that if I grab the topic too soon, before I've filled up after the last book, I might well lose my way long before the journey is finished. We novelists tend to be a superstitious lot. Henry James went into society and found his stories. I enter the absences of my life and understanding. All novels, or certainly mine, are autobiographical in one respect only, not in the storyline, nor in the characters, but in why the author, me, wrote that particular novel at that particular time. Therein lies a truth. And as ideas open before me, with all of this early reading, death, Marla, the power of art, a dysfunctional and abusive marriage, I become more confident that there will be another novel. I have my main character, Adrian Moore. He's an academic, 43 years old. His area is the cultural work of the dead. His own parents died when he was still a young boy, but he doesn't see this as in any way significant in his choice of scholarship. I start with him, umpteen promising beginnings that within weeks, sometimes only days, have shed their gloss. I revel in the relief of the occasional scene that has traction and the delight and the tease of new ideas. I know the temptation and frustration of 1,000 possible narratives. The word count waxes and wanes. 20,000 words one day becomes 13,000 the next. That's a total of what I've written. It goes backwards. My folder of jottings is the only aspect of the new novel that reliably increases in size. The surface of my desk has disappeared under research notes, reminder jottings, handwritten notebooks, annotated typescripts, and a few unpaid bills. And I walk the streets, so much walking, and invariably I find myself improvising on a new narrative strand and dashing home to try it out. This new novel that does not exist is occupying my life. It's a feeling that's exciting and frustrating, stimulating and irritating, illuminating and tedious. About 20,000 words in, this doesn't take into account the tens of thousands of words that have been discarded, it's happening again. I'm reading hectically. Now the choice of books is far less haphazard. I've thought enough and written enough to have a firm idea of what the novel is about. I'm reading about the history of paper because I've decided to make my youngest character, Kezzy, an artisan of handmade paper. She was raised in a family who attended a Hillsong type of church, so I'm reading memoirs about Hillsong and other Pentecostal and evangelical churches. I'm listening to Marla, imagining him through the mind and ears and experience of my scholar of the dead, Adrian. And I'm thinking about love, thinking about what binds people together in long-term destructive relationships, like my character, Laura. I make notes as I read, notes that relate to my characters. Sometimes a scene comes to mind, even a whole chapter. Connecting with another imagination in the intimacy of reading, it sparks my own imagination. It's a wonderful process. So, what have I been reading? Deborah Levy's The Man Who Saw Everything. I'm reading this book because of Anne Patchett's new novel, The Dutch House. I went to Readings bookstore in Carlton to buy the Patchett, and there in new releases was Deborah Levy's new one, a novel that traverses the 1980s to the present day, character-based and ideas-driven, and written in Levy's lucid, rich prose. Levy's characters provoke some surprising thoughts about my own very, very different characters. It's a good read. Oh, and so's Patchett's, by the way. David Bialy's Gershom Scholem, Master of the Kabbalah. Mention of this book was made in a recent article in the New York Review of Books. It occurred to me that while Scholem's name was very familiar to me, I knew nothing about him, nor the Kabbalah. Bialy's book is part of the excellent Yale Jewish Life series, a recommendation in itself. Jewishness is not significant in my new novel, although my character Laura is Jewish, but suddenly it seemed essential and urgent too that I learn about Scholem. I read the book over a couple of days. Scholem was a great scholar, and there are some wonderful quotes in Bialy's book about the power of writing, of language, of story. One quote from Goethe's Faust particularly struck me. Parchment, is that the secret fount from which you drink to still your thirst forever? And then Sholem himself writes, the desiccation of the language has dried out our hearts. Adrian, my scholar of death, is grappling with the problems of meaning, and in particular the nature of meaning without language. He's never been musical, but a chance exposure to Mahler has started him on an investigation of how something that cannot be expressed in words can have such a powerful effect. And this power of music, the non-verbal, full of meaning aspect of music, is something that I'll be discussing far more fully in a Lyceum talk that is currently scheduled for the 8th of September. I put my books aside and I listened to Mahler's Das Lied von der Erde, a piece of the Song of the Earth, a piece of music that has a profound effect on Adrian early on in the new novel, an effect that, word man as he is, he simply does not understand. I let the music lift me out of the quotidian into the imagination swirl. The music plays, the voice lures, and I travel without will, without any monitoring whatsoever, through memory, musings, ideas, images that are not in the least essayist, but more like a Kandinsky painting. So I then turn to Kandinsky's little book concerning the spiritual in art. In this book, Kandinsky explains his theory and understanding of art, music, and the numinous. In the years 1911 to 14, Kandinsky produced a number of large lyrical paintings. I've always loved these paintings, but it was only this past November when I saw some of them again at Munich's Lenbach House that I realized the connection these paintings have to music, and more generally to a meaning that seems to circumvent language. Rothko's work, of course, has the same effect. As I read Kandinsky's book, it's a slender book, but it demands a careful reading, some of the struggles and insights that beset my character Adrian sharpen and at the same time acquire a firmer foundation. Rather than the usual fragments that characterize this early stage of a novel, I actually reach for a proper notebook and write several pages. While I was in Germany, I read Marjorie Perloff's Edge of Irony, in which she, like others before her, visits the Hungarian intellectuals of the mid-20th century, an extraordinary group that included the mathematician John von Neumann, writer Arthur Koestler, the photographer Robert Capa, my favourite physicist Leo Szilard, and Elias Canetti, although Canetti could be said to have come from several places, including Bulgaria and Vienna. Anyway, Canetti was mentioned by Perloff, and I realised I'd not read his 3-volume autobiography. I'd always assumed I had, it being one of the books I ought to have read. I've read the first 2 volumes now, The Tongue Set Free, about his childhood, and The Torch in My Ear, the volume that charts his late teens through to his 20s, and I'm in the middle of the 3rd. I've had these books on my shelf for many years, but books find you at the right time, and this is clearly my time for the Canetti autobiography. There was a morning not so long ago when I read in a section which Canetti may or may not, in which Canetti may or may not be in love with a Russian chemist, Eva, who works in the same laboratory as he does. I think of the ramifications of not knowing if you love someone, and I'm not thinking of Canetti and the Russian chemist. I'm thinking of my character, Laura, caught in a marriage that she regards as deep and meaningful and everyone else sees as cruel and destructive, a marriage that has lasted for about 30 years. She's in her late 50s. I make some jottings about Laura and read on. Several pages later, Canetti writes of a specific type of hearing, a rare type of hearing that was impossible unless you exclude your own feelings. My character Laura thinks about the common intrusion of this I. What people usually hear is first sieved through a mesh of their own desires and disappointments. And Laura starts to wonder about her own husband, what actually drives him in his relationship with her. But even more fundamentally, I am wondering what would finally open Laura's eyes to the man her husband truly is. I reach for my notebook. I've got it. And I got a chapter too. And of course, I'm reading poetry. I'm still dipping into Ted Hughes's Crow. My character, Adrian, is, after all, an expert on death. And I've reread Goethe's Prometheus. It was mentioned in the Canetti autobiography. And I've not long finished The Death of Empedocles, both Holderlin's and Matthew Arnold's versions. Death, death, and more death. And it occurs to me that Adrian's new book in the novel, Adrian's new book might well be centred on death in literature. We'll see, it's a thought. So this is my recent reading. If I glance down my list for the last months of 2019, there are a lot of books and very diverse. And what emerges from all of this reading? An imagination that is ranging far and wide, definitely without a roadmap, new thoughts, new ideas, nascent characters who are gaining in flesh and sensibility, interesting scenes and curious events, most of which won't survive the first draft, and some roughish chapters. At the end of it all, one hopes there'll be a new novel. I hope there will be. But it couldn't happen without reading. Indeed, life couldn't happen without reading. And where am I now? Well, I'm about halfway through the first draft of a novel whose working title is Adrian's Awakening. I started this novel with Adrian's story, thus the title, but now it is as much Kezzy's story, she's the young papermaker, and Laura's story, and even her husband's story, Tony, although I don't think I'm going to give him the point of view. I don't think he'll ever get a voice. The best thing is that I have the sense of the whole novel in my head, the why of this novel as against any other novel. I know what it's about. It's taken root. Now it's just a matter of creating the narrative, the story that will carry the ideas and, one hopes, grip a reader. We'll see in another 2 to 3 years. Thank you.